mostly in the form of oxygen concentrators and oxygen cylinders. So in order to address this lack of option for high flow therapy, our team has developed the ArtemisHFNC. At only $500 to make, our device can deliver effective high flow therapy in resource limited settings by interfacing with any type of oxygen infrastructure, including portable oxygen sources. So let's think back to John, who was diagnosed with pneumonia in a low resource hospital setting. With the ArtemisHFNC, he could be transitioned to high flow therapy, which has been shown to have better clinical outcomes. So now we're going to take a second to walk through how this device would be used to provide care to this patient. So first, the clinician would ensure that two different inputs are attached. The first is an air source and the second is an oxygen source. So here we're showing it attached to an air compressor and also an oxygen concentrator, which is really commonly used as an oxygen source in low-income settings. So second, the clinician is able to input the values for the prescribed therapy on the touchscreen, which sends information to the controller to provide the desired therapy. So for example, let's say John is prescribed 20 liters per minute with an oxygen concentration of 40%. And what this does is it expels old recycled air from his lungs and it increases his blood oxygen levels. So by allowing the clinician to adjust these parameters, they have full control over the air delivered to the patient, and they can change it at any time to optimize the patient therapy and patient comfort. So the device adjusts the prescribed flow and oxygen levels through the blending subsystem. This system blends room air and supplemental oxygen to generate high flows at controllable rates from 10 to 40 liters per minute and 20 to 95% oxygen. So as you can see here, we validated that our device can robustly control the flow from 10 to 40 LPM and 20 to 95% O2. The straight dotted lines in green here show actually the ideal output values for a hypothetical perfect control. And as you can see, all of our data points are close to these desired perfect points. So these ranges of flow rates and oxygen mean that the device can address the entire spectrum of respiratory distress symptoms for the patient John or any other child who might be experiencing respiratory distress. So as I previously mentioned, this device is unique from existing HFNCs because it's compatible with a wide range of oxygen and air sources, including those available in low resource settings. And this versatility has been achieved using a pair of pressure regulators and proportional solenoid valves that are controlled by a combined flow and oxygen sensor and a robust control algorithm in our blending system. The blended air from this system then travels to a humidification chamber, which sits atop a heater. And this metal heater transfers heat to the humidification chamber, which is full of water. And thus the air is heated to 37 degrees Celsius and humidified to 12 milligrams per liter or more. And this warm, high-flowing air exits the chamber before traveling to John through a nasal cannula. So by warming the air, we are able to actually keep the patient comfortable, and by humidifying it, we are able to prevent infection, which would be caused by dried out airways. So to summarize all that, the intuitive user interface, novel blending control system, and heated humidifier work together to deliver therapy that the patient John desperately needs to survive. So in today's world, these patients don't have access to life-saving high-flow therapy. But by uniquely interfacing with portable O2 sources, the ArtemisHFNC turns high-flow therapy from an idealistic goal into a real feasible option for patients all across the world. With the ArtemisHFNC available, John and potentially millions of other children's chances of survival are greatly increased. So in the coming months, our team is applying for a provisional patent and looking for industry partnerships. And together, we're striving to eliminate inequities in medical care for patients in respiratory distress and working to bring the world closer to the goal of quality access to healthcare for all. So we want to give a special thanks to all of our advisors and professors from the Rice Department of Bioengineering and the Rice 360 Institute for Global Health for all their help and support. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and we're really excited to chat more and answer any questions that people might have.
This is Lloyd. Great job. I do have a question, especially in light of COVID and ventilators. Does this particular machine have any potential for assisting with respiratory treatments and therapies along the lines of the pandemic?
Yeah, most definitely. Dora, if you don't mind switching to slide 63. I don't know if we include ventilators exactly in this same slide, but the difference between ventilators and this technology is that ventilators are invasive, requiring intubation, which is much more of an intense and uncomfortable treatment for any patient. So the advantage that this treatment has over ventilators is that it utilizes the nasal cannula and is much more comfortable for any patient, while still being just as effective.
Yeah, I want to add on to that. So as you know, like COVID is still a pretty much recent thing. So there hasn't been a lot of clinical research into using high flow nasal cannula for COVID patients yet. However, our team have looked into the current literature, and there is an increasing amount of evidence that support the use of high flow nasal cannula in COVID patients, as well as other respiratory distress disease as well. So the science is still early, so we cannot say anything for sure yet, but there has been increasing evidence that we have some utility for this kind of high flow nasal cannula for COVID patients. And this will become even more important if we can make this really widely accessible, even for low income countries where sometimes they don't even have ventilator yet. Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any regulatory hurdles that you see ahead?
Sorry, had to mute myself. Yeah, so right now in the US, this would be classified as a class 2 device and would go down like the 510K pathway. And we looked into sort of literature and regulations surrounding like low resource settings that we would be marketing this device to. And they're very similar in regards to like the testing that we need to complete, as well as like the validation studies. So we're tending to follow the ISO and FDA guidelines regarding that, and then hoping that those would help accelerate our pathway into low resource settings as well.
You mentioned what, a $500 cost for the device. Is there like a potential for that price to come down further, and then, or the cost to come down further? And what about the cost of consumables to operate the device on an ongoing basis? What are those costs? I noticed there was like a Fisher-Paykel, what looked like, a possibly disposable part on the machine.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So just to give a bit more details, the $500 cost is roughly the amount we spend to make one prototype at the moment. And definitely as we scale it up, especially in terms of the pneumatics component and the electronic component, there is huge potential for cost saving as we increase the quantity that we want to produce this unit. However, as you mentioned, there is also the disposable portion of the device that includes the nasal cannula that interface directly with the patient, as well as to a certain extent the humidification chamber. So the goal, so we actually did not focus on the patient interface for this project. Instead, we focus more on the blending system and the heated humidifier system. But in terms of our plan for how to do and how to make sure those components are also taken into account, we plan to seek out partnership with companies like Fisher-Paykel to help us mass manufacture these kind of components. And at large scale, those are actually not negligible, but much lower compared to the capital cost of our current system. So it's not the focus of our project at the moment, but down the line, we are definitely looking more into that.
How did you market test the design that you were putting together? Who were you interfacing with to get feedback on whether you were on the right path? What feedback did you get along the way? And what are maybe the unfinished problems, with the device, bugs in the device that still need to be worked out before it would be, something that, is a viable solution?
Right, so that's a really great question, and my team, please feel free to add on to what I'm about to say. But so Dr. Malia, who is also here today, he was actually the person who bring the problem to our team. through his experience working across different settings, he have noticed that there's a lack of such a device in low resource settings, and he came to us basically with a problem, asking us to give him an engineering solution. And throughout the way, he has also been our key clinical collaborator who helped us give a lot of feedback onto the design, as well as allow us a chance to also test our device at an emergency room here in the United States, just to make sure that our device can perform the way it's supposed to, and also give us a lot of feedback when it comes to how physician would actually interface with this kind of device. So that is basically our largest source of, I guess, confirmation and advice along the way. But we also base a lot of our judgment through talking to different stakeholders. So we regularly schedule calls with external or like potential expert who might be able to give us some ideas in terms of procurement of medical device and in terms of some other stuff. And they are basically the one who have been giving us advice along the way. And yeah, feel free to add to anything I say for my team.
Yeah, so I see that we've navigated to the limitations slide here. You also asked about that, and I can speak a bit to the current limitations. So there are just some inherent flaws with the device, given that it's currently in a prototyping stage. So the combined flow and oxygen sensor that we've been using is actually a prototype that we acquired from an external company. So it has a bit of a delay sometimes, so that can contribute to delays with our oxygen, with our FiO2 oxygen concentration readings. So we would need to sort of get a more high fidelity sensor there. And then also the compressor that we're currently using as an air source is a regular air compressor, but ultimately we would need to partner with an external company to make sure that we have a compressor that's validated to actually serve as an air source for medical purposes. And the last major challenge, which Huang touched on this a little bit, but we've been focusing primarily on blending and humidifying and not as much on our patient interface. So it's been a challenge to procure nasal cannulas because they're typically sold in bulk, which would eat up almost all of our budget. So we're currently working to hopefully be able to test with an actual cannula rated for high flows in the next couple of weeks.
I have a technical question. Sorry, I'm late. I was for your presentation, but I watched your video. So could you list any like a safety feature of this system? For instance, like condensation of this vapor at the end of the tube, and it can cause some issue, and clogging, the nasal path. So what could you list the safety things that you have in this? You have it in your design, or if there is any?
Yeah, Dora, would you mind going to the FMEA slide? Perfect. So this is very small text, kind of hard to read, but we have fleshed out a pretty thorough failure analysis of the device. And one of them is what you mentioned, which is condensation in our tubing, which definitely, especially in settings where it's colder outside than in the heated air, we do experience condensation. So to sort of remedy that, we have included an optional cover for the tubing that leads to the patient, which helps minimize the effects of the cooling as the air leads to the patient interface. We do still have some condensation in the actual nasal cannula, which, like I mentioned, that we attribute that to the fact that it's been difficult for us to procure cannulas that are rated for higher flows. So we're planning to test with one in the next couple of weeks and hoping that that will help resolve some of the condensation as well.
I see. I missed this table. Okay, thank you.
I didn't catch, you mentioned the cost of the system and the opportunity for cost reductions. Were you given a target cost when you started the project? And what's the sense check on, is the cost acceptable or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when our client, Dr. Malia, came to us, he came to us with a $500 cost of material in mind. And through the initial discussion, we decided that we would pass the minimum requirement if we get it below $750, and the ideal value would be below $500. So now we are standing at roughly around 500. I think it's like 520 the last time I checked. But with our hope is that with scaling up, we can definitely cut a lot of costs when it comes to the electrical components as well as the pneumatic components inside. And that will definitely push us well below the 500 mark that we initially set ourselves for.
Do you have an estimate for that?
As Kerrigan mentioned just now, one of the portion of our device that is kind of uncertain is because we use a prototype sensor from one of our partner company that we work with. So currently that prototype is the most uncertain, I guess, cost estimate in our device. Currently we are buying that sensor for $80, but we have been told by the company that at production scale, they can either give us like a $60 cost or like a $50 cost, depending on like their demand on their side. So with those kind of uncertainty, we cannot really give an estimate of the price at scale yet, but we know for a fact that we can cut down to below the $500 mark.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I cannot give you like a much more concrete estimate.
Quite all right. Thank you.
Guys, I have to sign off for another project, but this is really impressive. Wish we had more time to dig into it. Good luck to you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much for coming.
Yep. Thanks
Great
very
job,
much.
guys.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gosson, for coming.
Yeah, great job, guys. I was really impressed. So really happy for y'all. Y'all are making great progress.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Good luck.
you.